Hello and welcome to Connections Forum for Relationship, Expression and Healing. And this is episode 75. And the topic today is From the Outside, Looking In. And our special guest is Sheila Strover. Can you see? Yes. Okay, so Connections Forum offers single episodes and short series of talks and interviews regarding the most important areas in human life, such as relationship issues, personal expression, and self-development, as well as healing of these areas. The purpose of our show is to give you inspiration and also teach you new skills with which to handle the issues that are connected with our topics. And you can watch all our replays on our website, hangoutonconnections.com. I am Margherita Crystal Lotus, an intuitive mentor, healer, author, creative artist, and consciousness explorer from Sweden, which is my home country. I help stressed and overwhelmed professional women overcome emotional turmoil and recover their authentic self. And I do this work via online program or at Enchantment, a private healing retreat I created here in Kingston, Ontario. Yeah, that's Canada, where I live now. I came from an academic background of art and science, and I used my studies in math and chemistry to make sense of the intricacies of healing and using crystal tools, which is my passion. And I absolutely love seeing clients thrive and flourish when they receive the gift of healing in their life. And my website is thecrystallotus.com. So right now, over to you, Heidi.
Yeah, I'm Heidi Hornlein, or Adelheid Hörnlein, and I'm wearing many hats. I was a singer, classical singer, a voice teacher, and a voice therapist. I repair voices, and I could help so many people to have better voices when they speak, and especially when they sing. But my passion at the moment is doing Hangouts, this show here with Margherita, and I have together with Mark, my husband, the other show, The Wisdom Factory. This is a really big passion I have. And the other passion is to help people with relationship issues to connect in a better way, and we will be doing online courses too, and we are having retreats here in hot Italy, because today it's 30 centigrades inside the house. Really, really hot. I'm living in Italy, in Paradiso Integrale, which is a cultural association which is hosting the shows we are doing and all other activities. And we have, as I said, retreats, and we have place for people who want to stay in Italy, in Umbria, and visit the wonderful landscape here. Come by when you are between Rome and Florence and come and see us. And our common website is thepowerofrelationship.com. I think I've said everything sort of important about me. And now I go over to Sheila. Hi, Sheila. I'm very happy that you are here, because it's a long time. In internet, it's not really a long time, but it seems like a long time. It's more than a year ago that we met each other, and I got curious about the drawings you had. Sheila is known as the knee guru, like K-N-E-E. So it's about knees, about, these things which in older age often don't work anymore so well. I have tried it out, and I found when I go very often on bicycle, it's better. So anyway, I was curious in what she was doing, and I found out that she is really doing great work, helping people with problems. And from her background, she is a medical doctor. But today we don't want to talk about that, but about our topic is from the outside looking in. It's about her story, which in some way is connected with our story, Margherita's and mine. We are sort of displaced people. We are living in a different country than we were born. And the story of Sheila is even a little bit more complicated. And Sheila, at this point, I would invite you to talk a little about your story, and then we want to see what we have learned out of this story, which I think is quite uncommon, because at least for Americans, you know, I know that most Americans have no passport. I mean, they might not even go to Canada. They are sort of confined in their own country and hardly ever go to another. I mean, this is not true, but to live in another country, it's I think far away for most of the people, unless they have a real necessity to, like we have here in Europe, all the people coming from Africa and Eastern countries and want to come over to Europe. Then it's a real big survival necessity. How was it for you instead, Sheila?
I think most people meeting me online, Heidi, think that because I have an English accent and I speak an English which is without too much local dialect, that I'm English maybe from a school that was careful with accents and things. But in fact, I'm a latecomer to England. I was born in South Africa in 1947. And I was born today because it's my birthday. So a long time ago, and a lot of water has passed under the bridge in South Africa since I was born. But I don't identify with South Africa, even though I was born there, because my parents were not born there. Whoops! I knew I would lose my wire there. My parents were both born in Scotland, and my father's family come from the Shetland Islands. So my grandparents emigrated to South Africa probably around about 1920, and both sets of grandparents, and took my parents to South Africa as little children. So my grandparents spoke with a Scottish accent, and they didn't identify with England, and they didn't really identify that much with South Africa. So I started off really feeling a little different, although I was, I think Heidi's having a little bit of problem with sound. Is there a sound problem?
No, it's good. It was not good before. I don't know if it's on my side or if it was on your side. Now it's okay. It is resolved. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, at the age of 7, then my father and my mother left South Africa and went to what was then Southern Rhodesia. So they went from what a country that they identified quite a lot with because they had been schooled there, but then they went to Southern Rhodesia, which was a British Commonwealth country, and that's where I did all my schooling. So I did for many years kind of think of myself as being Rhodesian, but then I myself went to South Africa to study in my turn at university, and finally left and came to England as a married woman, and found myself halfway back to where my grandparents had come from. But during that period, Southern Rhodesia changed to Rhodesia and then changed to Zimbabwe. The town I grew up in was called Gatuma and changed to Kadoma. The mines where my father worked closed down. So there wasn't a lot to hold on to, really. So I spent 10 years or so in England, and my own marriage broke up, and I went to live in France. So that was a new experience, and actually I think France was the beginning of my awareness of where one belongs and what a culture is, because we would all have a glass of wine and everybody would start singing, and I suddenly realized I couldn't sing any of the songs, although I spoke French and I could converse happily with my friends. They were singing nursery songs and they were singing pop songs from the 60s, and I just couldn't understand. I didn't know the words, and I started realizing that even though in England I wasn't English and I didn't feel English, I didn't know all the songs. So there's a kind of idea, if you're English, of a kind of extended family that goes through the Commonwealth countries and the old empire, that at least gives you that framework. So, long story. And then I came back to England, and I'm now in Cornwall. So I just wondered how you feel when your songs are obviously not songs of Italy, they're songs of Germany, where you grew up. And I'm sure Margherita's, if she has too many glasses of wine, she'll be inclined to sing Swedish songs. So I think so much of identity relates to what you learnt, from your cultural background, rather than perhaps from the country of your birth or country of your youth. I don't know. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I find it so interesting that you talk about the songs, because that's exactly what it is. I was teaching here singing, and it was difficult for me because everybody knew the songs and I didn't. So really it depends very much on what you have learned in your childhood and in the time when when you get, let's say, socialized. So,
and I think the other thing must be, besides songs, another big influencer must be food, because I relate very strongly to Scottish food. Like, what I call pancakes are small, and in England pancakes are big, and they're like French crepe, and I relate to Scottish pancakes and oaten cakes and scones, Scottish scones, and things called girdle scones that you bake on a metal plate, and yet the people here locally, they don't relate to any of those things. So clearly my Scottish grandparents set in my mind, that you eat porridge for breakfast, and that you bake scones on a girdle or a griddle, and so I have those expectations, but they're very foreign where I am now. So I think that might be another thing that identifies you.
Probably where you grew up, you I think in the green room you said that your grandparents came to South Africa and they never really spoke any of the indigenous languages, so they were foreign in the outside, although they lived there already. And so that is what's happening often when you go into a foreign country. You are sort of clung to your habits, which you know from home, and when you grow up in this surrounding, you get these habits, and not South African habits, probably.
Yes, I think that people that are maybe second or third generation South African would relate to South Africa very differently from the way I do. For example, when you're schooled in South Africa, you generally have as your second language, if you're a white South African, you have the Dutch dialect of Afrikaans. But because although I was born there, I was schooled in Rhodesia, in Zimbabwe, we tended to learn French. So when I returned to South Africa, I found myself hampered to a large extent because the language of the hospital bureaucracy in which I worked was in fact Afrikaans, and I didn't speak a word of it. So I had to learn a new language at that stage. So there's so many things that affect the way you see yourself, and so I don't have any strong sense of identity at all, which I think people find strange.
It's especially weird, you come back to the country where you were born and you don't speak the official language. This is at least when I go home to Germany, I mean, at least I understand them and I can speak. But let us see, Margherita has a comment here. Would you like to read it, Margherita?
Yes. So Rain Dowell is saying, do you like haggis? Do you like?
I actually do like haggis, but it wasn't something that my family tended to make. I'm not sure why, but certainly they would celebrate Hogmanay, which is Scottish New Year, and my father would suddenly become very strange and wild and start dancing and hooping, making this hoo-hoo noise when he was dancing with his hands in the air, and that was very, very strange to everybody around us. But he, of course, had picked that up from his Scottish childhood. So But I used to be told that if I was a naughty girl, I would get my dock scalped, which means you'll get your bottom smacked. And my grandmother used to bake puddings in a clootie, which is like a cloth. And some of these words probably are familiar to Margherita, because I think that North Scotland and the Scandinavian countries have a lot of words in common. Rain is sending me birthday wishes on the internal chat. Lots of cake and balloons.
Well, we have discovered with Sheila that we are probably related, because I'm from Sweden and Sheila is sort of have the Viking blood somewhere. And I don't recognize the two words that you said, but it sounds like it could come from an ancient source in Scandinavia.
Okay. Well, I think my beginning of having a feeling of a national identity was very recent. A couple of years ago, I decided I had too many old photographs, and I boxed them up and I sent them to my nieces in New Zealand, where they ended up. And they wrote back to me and they said, "Who's in this picture? Who's in that picture?" And while I was trying to communicate with them about these old pictures, I went online and I put my family name to see if I could find any more about the people in the pictures. I discovered a letter from somebody online that says, "Does anybody know what happened to this family? That this man left the Shetland Islands and he went to Aberdeen and he got married, and we think his wife was called this, and they had a daughter called that, and they had a son, and then we believe that that only son had a daughter as well, and then we lost contact with them." So I wrote to them and I said, "This can only be my family, because the combination of names must be my family, but I don't know who you are." And she said, "Well, we're in the Shetland Islands, and our family has lived for generations and generations and generations in the Shetland Islands. And this person, who is your grandfather, was the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son of the oldest son. And he left and we lost contact with him." So I suddenly discovered that I had masses of relatives, all in the Shetland Islands, who'd been there since the beginning of the Viking era, and that they had kept very careful genealogical records and were able to trace the furthest they went back was a Viking ancestor who had been shipwrecked on the islands, whose name was Sjovald, Sjovald. And the reason why it was all carefully recorded was that at that particular period, 1500, the Shetland Islands was part of the dowry of the Princess of Norway, who was marrying the Prince of Scotland. And that they started keeping very careful records because they weren't sure who owned the islands at that time. So I was absolutely gobsmacked, amazed to suddenly find, from feeling that I had no cultural identity at all, to finding this one that went back so far. So I know that I now have a Viking background, which shocked me terribly because I thought the Vikings were vicious, horrible people. And I suddenly find that I'm very Viking myself.
And that you have so many relatives, no? Now, this is amazing. For instance, I don't know much more than 2 generations of my family before. I could go.
I didn't either. I did not either. Yeah. I thought that my father was an only son and his father was an only son, and that was the end of that, and we couldn't go any further back. Michael Thomas is asking which is my favorite recipe for Scottish scones. The scones my grandmother used to make were girdle scones, which, even though we didn't have a need for a cast iron way of cooking, I think it comes back very much to the sort of little crofts that they would have in North Scotland and the Shetlands, where you make a mixture for scone, but you put it all in one lump on the griddle, and it all comes up together, so you don't have like little English scones, and you cut it into segments, you cut it into wedges, and then it has like a slightly burnt flavor and a very different from ordinary scones. So that's part of, I'm sure, my cultural background, that nobody in South Africa would make scones like that unless they were of Scottish ancestry.
Well, I think from my Swedish heritage, we used to do that. You did put it all at once, and then my mother used to do in a square pan or rectangular pan, and she'd stick it in, and then cut it like this, because we were 5 kids, right? It's much easier to break off.
And then you turn them on their side and you cook them on the side, which no Englishman would ever drink.
Right. I don't remember that, but we cut them in half and then opened them up and put butter and marmalade and stuff like that.
So what we are doing now is actually from the outside looking into our home countries, no? And Sheila, even in the country which is not even her home country, which is her backward home country. 2 circles, let's say, no? Only from your ancestors. You asked before, how is it for us when we are living somewhere else? We had a show with Anna Hoffman where we talked about that already. She comes from Russia and is living now in California, I think. It is, you know, what I discovered only 2 or 3 days ago, that my view from Germany is still that when I left it. And there are people who leave their countries with 15 or something, and now they are 70, and they still think it's everything like 60 years ago. And this is a little bit like it happens. We think we know our home country, but actually we don't. And I, at the same time, living in Italy, I don't even know this country very well, you know. So what is it? What do I know? I don't know. How is it for you?
Well, I haven't been back to Zimbabwe for many years. I'm sure I would recognize the main roads and I would recognize the main countryside features, but there wouldn't be much else that I'm sure I would find familiar anymore.
Yeah, and not only the roads change, but I think also people change, and the ways, the habits change, and the organization of culture, of community, everything is different. When I lately was in Germany, I found, I mean, Germany has they say that in Germany it's everything neat and ordered and so on, but this time I really thought, oh, this is a sort of obsessive orderliness, at least in the places where I was. And I thought, oh, would I like to go back in a country like this, while here in Italy I have this freedom, this big property, or, you know, the next neighbor is 100 meters and then the village is in 2 kilometers, and, you know, this freedom. And I can have my garden mowed or not mowed, nobody is saying anything. But in Germany, I don't think you could do that. So.
I would like to ask a question to you, Sheila, and that is, what is your feeling right now about, you said displaced? Have you gone into that and discovered what that was for you? What did that create inside of you?
I think I feel less displaced now that I've done this circle, as Heidi calls it, because although I've never been to the Shetland Islands, I am able to identify with the past there. I know the history of the place. I can feel my family leaving for whatever reason, and then I then learned why people from Scotland left in the 1920s because of pressures of poverty and also the carrot of colonializing, you know, Southern Africa and other places like that, and they just left. They got on a boat and they sailed away and never came back, which was immensely brave, very much like the Americas were colonized. And I've done the loop and come back again, and although I haven't reached the Shetlands yet, I think I feel a sense of peace now that I do understand who they were, why they left, why they moved, and the circle of it all. And but I didn't. For a long time, I was just confused. I just felt a little bit angry that I didn't know where I belonged. So, but I feel more peace now. And I think the two of you, you know your cultural background and where you come from. And I'm beginning to feel that way. So even though I'm in Cornwall and I have a Cornish flag on my lower third, I do have an understanding of the history of the Vikings, the Picts, the Shetland Islands, the wartime role, why people were displaced from the regions of Scotland and why they went to South Africa, because there was the lure in South Africa of space and being able to buy your own property and have space. And my family on one side were miners, and so they went there because of the mining. And when you've got the whole picture of it, you feel at peace with the way it went. So I think I have that peace now. So.
It's interesting that you share this, because it reminds me of my mother's family. There was a very known artist, and then some of my relatives on that side did a genealogy and actually studied exactly where that line came from, and it was from 1751 something, when I think it was a Belgian lieutenant in the army of Charles the 12, the king at the time in Sweden, that he stayed and started this family line. So I have a Belgian or French descent too from that time. That makes me think that even though we go back in time and we have that country and this country, I think we're all related in some way or another. It's just that we want to feel that we belong. We want to feel, to identify with things. And I mean, I live now more than 25 years here in Canada, and I still think that my home is in Sweden. And it's very reassuring to talk with my siblings and my mother, who's still alive, and I keep the roots active there, so I can understand it.
Yeah, I think belonging is such an important question. I mean, in adulthood, probably less, but in childhood, it's so important that we know where we belong to. And as long as we had that, even if we go away later and go all around the world, there is a sort of grounding there. But people who have never belonged, as a child, they went from one place to the other place to the other place. And when they had there are stories for families like this. A child has had a little bit like you, but there is even worse things. As soon as they find friends, next year they go to another place. I think maybe now comes to my mind the circus people who are going all around the world. There is no belonging. This is really, really, really difficult. And what you say, Margherita, I find it interesting, because I actually don't feel that sort of belonging. I'm belonging to, let's say, to the world. But I don't really belong to Germany, and I don't belong to Italy, and even less to America. Also with Mark, I have this connection. Maybe I belong to the circle of people I really have in my circle of care. But national, maybe this is a German peculiarity, that we have a difficulty to belong to our country. I don't know, but for me it's still not close the circle, let's say, that I would be sure what place I belong to. Exactly.
I felt a little bit the same. I beg your pardon.
Go ahead.
I was saying that I have had a similar thing with studying medicine, because the man I married, his father was a doctor, his grandfather was a doctor, his uncle was a doctor, his brother was a doctor, his great-grandfather was a doctor. But in my family, I was the very first one. So I never had anyone in the family that I could say, can we talk about this difficult situation today? Can you help me deal with this situation of grieving for a patient who's died? Or can you help me come to terms with the night I had last night? I never had that because my family just wouldn't have understood at all. My father was a metallurgist. He worked on the mines. My grandfather was a skip operator on the mines. They could talk about maybe what it was like to be trapped underground or that sort of thing, but they had no concept of what my training was like or my work. So that was also very isolating. So I think that's another thing.
How did you manage as a woman to study medicine and to work in the profession? I mean, you were a different generation, even like mine. I mean, it was not normal that we women would work.
I don't know how I ended up there, Heidi. Just a set of circumstances, I think. I went to university with the objective of being a teacher. I had a teaching bursary from Rhodesia at the time. I was going to be a biology teacher. I went to university. I signed up for zoology, botany, and then I found I hated botany with such a passion that I couldn't imagine myself ever completing the course, never mind being a botany teacher. And I actually love botany now. But I tried to find an alternative course that wouldn't waste my first year. And there was a degree called medical science. And I thought, what the hell, I'll do that. So I switched to something called medical science. And then the second year, I was given credit for 1 year. So the second year, the medical science students went into the same class as the medical students and the dental students, and we did dissection and we learnt anatomy, and then I went into the science labs for my third year while they carried on with medicine, and I was consumed with jealousy because they were all wearing white coats and they were on the wards and they had stethoscopes around their necks, and so I ended up following them. But I didn't mean to. It just happened.
That is curious. It's another story of belonging, not belonging and then finding the belonging, no? And now you belong then to the medicine, to the doctor's crew, didn't you?
I think so now, yes.
I wanted to add something there because when I came to Canada, and you both could perhaps relate to that, Heidi and Sheila, it was so big change to go to another country that the small habits that people have, the taste of the coffee, which I love, and I had a crash after 4 months, and then I recovered from that, and I realized I have been conditioned from birth to see that this is what's real. And then when I came to Canada, that picture, what I thought was real, is just a programming. It could be good or bad, but it's still a programming. And so, I really resonate with belonging to the world, I could say, Heidi, because then I realized there is conditioning everywhere. And if you don't move out, you get your butt out of that programming, you can never see it. And that makes for taking responsibility and having a worldview that is even more supportive to yourself, because you're closest to actually how it is. And that's very important for me. And I mean, Sheila, you have so much experience, and I want to see, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I was laughing actually at you saying, get your butt out, or whatever you said about a butt, because I don't think anybody in Scandinavia would say that. So you've absorbed something from the Canadian culture. I think once you find yourself with this voyage, you can enjoy the culture in which you land so much more For example, now I'm in Cornwall, and I learned so much. When I first came to Cornwall, I thought, oh, what a grey place. All the buildings are made of stone. They're so grey. Everything's grey. There's not much economy here. People don't have much money, you know. And now that I've been here for a long time, well, not a very long time, but a reasonable amount of time, I've learnt about the situation of Cornwall, that, you know, for centuries there was a neglect of industry here, because the mines eventually ran out of the wonderful metals that they had, and there was very little to replace it. And you know, they're lovely historical shows on television at the moment about this particular situation, but the houses are built of stone because the stone came out the mines. You know, the Methodist sort of worldview here by Methodist I mean the sort of puritanical Protestant worldview, is because mining was strongly Methodist in its culture. So what we have here is the tip of a country that was isolated for centuries from a cultural perspective, with their own language. They were reliant on the, you know, what was under the ground for their wealth. The local people were exploited by the people who owned the mines. And you know, I understand now the whole, well, not the whole thing, but a lot about you know, the Cornish people and why they are like they are, which I wouldn't have understood if I didn't have my own framework as a reference. Which I don't know if I've answered your question, Margherita.
Yeah, I think so. That was great. And Heidi has a comment from Rain Dowell.
Yeah, and it's about the feeling of belonging. I would go back to the feeling, and this is her question is how they relate, the expats, which we are, to the feeling of belonging. You know, how do you feel now? Do you feel to belong to Cornwall, or do you feel to belong to the Shetland Islands, or is it a mental thing, or is it a feeling?
I think I feel that I belong to the Scottish Shetland background from which I hail, but I have empathy now with Cornwall. I understand a lot about the reason why the Cornish people think the way they do and behave the way they do, and you know, the cultural things and the economic things here. I have an empathy with, whereas when I first came here I didn't understand anything at all, actually.
Yeah, and I think this is the great gift of us going outside our very narrow circle, because we, as Margherita said, we understand that what we think is reality is not necessarily reality for other people. And as you say, Sheila, when you begin the reality, the life conditions and the past and also the present situation of other people, you don't have to be anymore angry because it's all different or feel displaced or whatever, but you can begin to have compassion and understanding for the other people and for yourself too. You know, we don't have to neglect that. Even we had the story of not belonging or of thinking the reality should be in a different way and get angry about that in our own lives. So for me, the best thing what young people can do, and fortunately they do it, to go around the world and see other realities and see what matters to other people, which can be diametrally on the opposite of what matters to ourselves, without judging. The thing is, we shouldn't say, oh, these are primitive, you know, aborigines, blah, primitive, but be curious and see what other people, what is life for other people, and what is the beauty in their way of seeing life. And I think, Sheila, you have seen quite a lot. I have no idea how it is in South Africa and in Rhodesia. Would you like to talk a little bit to make us understand what's the big difference from your previous or now, what you see now?
Well, again, I'm doing what you said earlier. I'm putting it in the framework of when I was there, which, we're talking a lifetime away. But when I was 7, for example, when I first went to southern Rhodesia, as it was, my father worked in a town, but we lived on a farm about, I think it was about 10 or 15 miles away. But there was no tarmac on the roads. They were dirt roads. There was no electricity. We first of all had paraffin lanterns, and then we had those pump-up storm lanterns that you put methylated spirits in, and eventually we had a generator, but we generated our own electricity. And we had no running water. We had a well, and we would crank the water out of the well. And eventually, again, my father built a storage tank so that we could have running water, but it was from the generator pumping the water out of the well. We had no neighbors. The nearest neighbors were 5 miles away, something like that. So there was only my brother and I. My sister was away at boarding school. So we played with the local black kids who worked on the farm. We would go swimming in a dam where there would have been all sorts of creepy crawlies that we didn't care about. We never wore shoes. Our entertainment was poking things out of the stones. There was lots of granite outcrops there. So we would entertain ourselves poking snakes out of the granite outcrops, and we would have stick insects in bottles for our pets. And at one stage we had a little lemur, what we called a pukanyoni, a small lemur with big eyes, and those were our pets. We didn't feel there was no such thing as television. We played games, we jumped, we climbed trees. We didn't have anything that an English kid now would identify as anything. They wouldn't imagine we had a life at all, but we had a lot of fun. So that was the beginning of my Zimbabwean childhood.
Well, we have a comment here from Josie James, and she says, "The older I get, the more I have found that home is where the heart is." What do you say about that?
That's very good. Very good saying, yeah.
And then we have John Cleese saying, "Sheila is a woman from the world."
Johan and I have been having lots of fun and rain testing crowdcasts, so we've had a lot of contact just lately.
So I guess we're coming to the end of the show right now, and what was your takeaway here, Sheila? What did this conversation make a difference for you?
I think that it's really interesting to speak to other people who are not in the environments in which they spent their childhood or where their family come from. So, but I can see that there are differences. I see the two of you as having a much stronger experience of identity, although I've gained identity. I don't have the experience of growing up in the Shetlands. I don't know what it's like to go and look at an otter or go out in a fishing boat and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's been a good conversation, good fun. Thank you.
And what's your takeaway, Heidi?
Yeah, for me, it's amazing how many stories we have in our lives and how they enrich our lives. And that even when we go through periods of, let's say, displacement, as you named it, then we gain the ability to even live a richer life, and having the possibility to looking from the outside in instead of being all the time in, and then it's very difficult to have a more objective vision of what our life is. And I think experiences like we have, and certainly yours, Sheila, is enabling us to do that, to take a step back and have a look and not to be so much immersed in our own story. That's my takeaway.
Great. And I'm going to bring up a comment from John Clays here. And he says, the older you are, the harder it gets to move and leave relatives, friends behind. Yeah, I think that's true too. Okay, so with that, Heidi, you have the button. And we thank Sheila so much for coming here and enlightening us with her stories. And I think this was a really insightful episode for myself. That's for sure.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. And I hope we could inspire people to not stick all the time where they are, but go out and see other countries, see other people, get to know other cultures with open and curious eyes, and not with, oh God, oh God, oh God, I don't want to get out of my comfort zone. It is really enriching. So thank you, and see you next week. Okay. Bye-bye.